is Anne Beavis. Anne Beavis is from the Crown Workspace. She's Head of Sustainable Development. She's a member of the IWFM Sustainability Special Interest Group and has co-authored many guides. So welcome, Anne, to the section.
Thank you very much. So, yes, I'm Head of Sustainable Development for Crown Workspace, and I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you about the glamorous world of reuse. Like others that have gone before me, I've been talking about this agenda for 20 odd years, and finally people are starting to be interested. The reason I've been invited to speak is because I've been pushing the reuse agenda in this environment for quite a long time, both in building but largely in the facilities sector. About 10 years ago, my client Premier Workplace Services, who are now Crown Workspace following their acquisition, asked me to look at workplace change and how we could make that more sustainable. And it became apparent to me that that was a massive area of waste. For those of you who don't know Crown Workspace, they're part of a global organisation, Crown Worldwide Group, and what they get involved in is moving and changing organisations, everything from planning a move to carrying it out, doing refurbishments around that sort of change process, as well as doing specialist services with IT and end-of-life solutions. So I became involved with them about 10 years ago to look at how we could make this whole process more sustainable. And hopefully some of the learnings that I've got from that I'll be sharing with you today. What was important to me was to maybe not blind you with lots more figures and facts. It is just before lunch, I appreciate that. But someone has tried to push this agenda. I've learned a lot along the way, and I thought hopefully some of the things that I've learned might be useful to you. There you go. It's just too hard. This is what I hear from so many people and have heard for a long time. I've sat across similar projects, met lots of different project managers, influencers, architects and different people, and I've heard these reasons for non-action. Some may be familiar to you. This project is just a bit too important to do something like reuse on. I've looked into it, but I do think it's a bit tricky. I've got a supply chain and I really trust them, and I don't want to take a risk with that. I think the internal is, how would it reflect on me if this all goes wrong? And so all of these statements that I've heard from people that are looking at trying to increase sustainability into project, they're valid. They really are, I understand that. This isn't easy. But then when you look at those excuses against the backdrop of climate action or climate change impacts, I think they may start to seem quite lame. There is another way of looking at this challenge, and I've sat around similar tables with similar projects, but I've heard, I want to do something really interesting with this project. This is quite exciting to look at reuse. I've heard, I'm challenged on cost and environmental impacts. What can we do? I've heard, this is really a good chance to work with social enterprises who are both social and enterprising, funny enough. This is going to be great. Social value is important to us. And I think really the biggest learning that I've had in this 20 years is what makes a difference between being successful in this and not is which of those two mindsets you have right at the very start. Because funny enough, the projects that have really embedded reuse and made it business as usual tend to come from this mindset, and I'm presuming everybody's in this room is somewhere around here, so that's great. I think we can all probably agree we use far too much stuff, both at home and at work, for far too short a time. And in reality, it's a mind-blowingly, it's almost breathtakingly wasteful. And yet, the answers is two simple things. In reality, it's use less stuff and use better stuff for longer. And these are behaviour changes that we've got to take on board, but they're actually really, really difficult to do. So well done for being here as a starting point. I think, you know, everybody's got a bit of a role to play, both at work and at home. And this is a good place to start because there's some really good stuff that's been shared in this room. And I talked at the start about workplace change. That's where historically I've been involved in setting up things like take-back schemes for plasterboard and looking at difficult products like Tetra Pak. It took a long time to develop really complex take-back and reuse schemes. There's a lot of barriers to them. But when I started looking at workplace change, it seemed to me a really obvious place to start because at that stage, so many decisions are being made about so many resources. And it's such a key point of where to be influential in this area. And I know that seems like stating the obvious, but it's when the sustainability really has to be at the top of the agenda and the mindsets really do have to be focused on what a great opportunity, what a great challenge, as opposed to the former. But actually sometimes at a big point of change, it isn't the time to make all of these decisions. But there's swaps that we can make and different business models, some of which we've heard about this morning, that we can embrace almost straight away. I think if you've got a big project coming up and you're trying to look at absolutely every single material that's going into that and finding an alternative, it can actually be really challenging. So why not look at things that you're using from tomorrow onwards and look at where you can influence those decisions where you are. I'm going to run through some really practical stuff just because it's before lunch and I think it's nice to always have some things in your pocket that you can do the next day to make it feel that you've walked away and there's something you could change, maybe at work or maybe at home. And I'm going to start with the stuff in the workplace that we get rid of. Because so much, particularly in the workplace, that's got rid of out of some change, really has got so much intrinsic environmental, economic and social value to it. And yet it's discarded quite readily. And I know organisations do look at this, but probably not really enough. I think it was the figures from 2011 was about 1.8 million office chairs and 1.2 million office desks were in landfill each year. We've moved on a bit from there, but not quite as far as we'd like. So if you're involved in this as part of your projects, the thing I'd suggest you do right at the start, make a reuse coordinator a role. If make that a full-time person, make that someone's project role. Put it in their job description that you need a reuse coordinator, because when I've seen that effectively done, the difference is amazing. The savings pay for the person. There's some really good learnings that they can take for future projects. And actually, why is that not a role? Why isn't that a thing? I mean, it should be, right? So if it's someone's role and responsibility to do that at the start of a project, the outcomes that you'll get already are significantly improved. And then, if there's assets with values, then you have to look to see what can be resold, what can be donated, what can be shared, what can be refurbished for your future. And again, already you might have alarm bells going in your head saying that's a little bit too hard, or that's going to take a bit of time and effort. But I go back to the start of the mindsets that you have and how influential you are in the outcome. And every time you do this, you learn a bit more, it becomes a bit easier. We're trying to rechange from the linear to the circular economy, as David talked about earlier. You know, that doesn't happen overnight. So these are the sorts of practical changes. The reuse bit is the awkward bit that we have to do in the middle in the transition. And we've all, you know, there's opportunities to do some really interesting stuff. Technology is a great enabler of this. There's some fantastic platforms out there. I don't know if any of you have come across GlobeChain or Warp It or the Giving Back Project, some of my favourites. These help you get rid of quality assets at the end of life quite easily. And although many of you may not be involved in IT in particular, but that's my massive bugbear. There's so much resource and energy in IT assets, and they're really used for far too short a time. Before I set up the IT repair and reuse facility at Crown, I did a survey. This was only in 2016. And 70% of facility managers had cupboards full of IT stuff they didn't know what to do with. if someone leaves or something happens and a perfectly good laptop, maybe 18 months old, or it gets put in a cupboard somewhere because there's a sense there's some value to it, but no one's got the mechanism to actually reuse that in some way. And likewise, we're stripping out server runs and data runs as we move to the cloud, but all of that kit was built to last much longer. So if we have a thought process and have a role and investigate the opportunities out there, you can just do better things. It's really quite simple as that. I'll talk a bit about furniture because that's the piece that I know most about. And it's probably something that goes into nearly all, well, it will go into all the workplaces that's being designed. And there's 2 points. First of all, buy good stuff. Investigate the specification. And we're in this wonderful showroom here, and we're being hosted by an organisation that we know takes this agenda seriously. And that's really good to see. If stuff is made well, if there's eco-design considerations, if you've got the product information, then that piece can last for a long time. So, specify the stuff, put the sustainability piece right at the top on that. But then also look at the longevity of stuff. Does it have to be thrown away? Can it meet the new specifications? Some of the people here have been to the Renew Centre that we set up for remanufacturing and refurbishing office furniture. And if you get the right quality stuff in the first place, you will see that you can put it through a process and it goes out for a second life with a warranty, looking super. And if that doesn't suit your own requirement, it can suit someone else's. So if you have a proper end-of-life process in place, there's no reason why stuff that you no longer need goes to waste. David also talked about carpet. Actually, that's something that we can do a lot more with. I know that there's problems sometimes with carpet, but there are some great reuse schemes out there now. So when we're clearing a building, depending on what we find, we will look to the carpet tiles and we'll go and work with an organisation like Greenstream or London Carpet Recycling, I think that's the right name. But there's lots of good organisations and social enterprises out there now that will take your carpet tiles, they will clean them up, they will resell them on their platform or donate them. Again, I know we've been just pulling this stuff up for years, and I know sometimes depending how it's put down, it's not possible. But the starting point should be that's business as usual to do that. Paint is another one, and I know again David touched on this, but the UK-wide paint reuse network is absolutely fantastic. I had the pleasure of going to a site in Leeds recently called Seagulls Repaint. It's a social enterprise. The people that are working there, they wouldn't necessarily readily find employment elsewhere, but they're operating and learning skills dealing with an end-of-life problem. And the good thing about social enterprises and about paint is that the support can be twofold. One, make sure your contractors are taking the paint to these places. And 2, can we buy from them as well? They're able to meet colour specifications. So many of these interesting solutions that do so much for society as well as the environment are social enterprises. And part of the problem can sometimes be scale. That's another reason I've heard for not using them. Oh, but they can't deal with us for scale. But that's no reason not to make them part of the solution. I've worked with charities and social enterprises for about 20 odd years in this area, and my understanding of them is they're scared of scale, so they tend to shy away from being a business level solution provider. But when you go and understand what it is that scares them, what are the volumes they can deal with, how can they support you, there's actually a great fix there for some of the business problems that you have. MCOR is a product that I'm testing at the moment. It's a composite board made from waste paper and agricultural waste. I think it's used quite widely in the Netherlands. It's a fantastic product. There's loads of products out there, and I know it's not easy to find out stuff really about them. I'm compiling them all at the moment, and I'll be happy to share the ones that I've put together so far, because it can be difficult to try and source the best in every single product. But once you've collated that once, it's just a change. That's all, really. Some other ones that you may not even necessarily be involved in at all, but to think about. If your organisation or the places you're designing have got catering facilities, Is their catering oil going as biodiesel? Because it should be, really. And uniforms, the textiles that go into them. There's a design case around textiles and about how uniforms are designed that has made recycling particularly difficult. But if you look at organisations like T-Mill and what they're doing with cotton and take-back schemes for uniforms, it's amazing some of the changes that can be made. And I suppose lastly on that is probably stuff around cleaning products. You know, I would hope organisations that have cleaners are challenging them to use refillables, or my new favourites, which are dissolvables, because they're brilliant, they really are. So there's a lot of better things that can be done across projects, and I know that it's not necessarily always easy to implement all those changes. But we can make some of those changes starting now, and then try and make a project of learning all the opportunities and testing them. But however, there will still be blockages when we want to make change. I call them fear, procurement, fight. It's not my bestseller. I haven't written that yet. These are the blockages that, even with the best intention and lots of information, these can be some of the blockages that we still face in organisations when you're trying to deliver change away how we deal with things. Procurement. The nature of the person is someone that's exacting, and it can be they're looking for detail, they want confidence, they want to mitigate risk. There's a whole range of traits around procurement that mean you need to take them on this journey with you. It's very difficult sometimes to specify for more sustainable or reused products. But that doesn't mean it can't be done. So if you're finding resistance from procurement, you need to understand what those blockages are, what are the concerns. Funnily enough, often when you talk about 70% or 80% cost savings, their ears can prick up. So that's a useful one. But you just need to understand what it is about the procurement structure that's going to cause blockages in your project. Just some creative wording in a tender, and maybe a realignment of percentages, opening up to alternative bids, just putting guidance about what you'd like to achieve to allow innovation to come through. Finances, again, accountants, they like to write things off in a number of years, and somehow that's come through to an intrinsic sense of value rather than a lifetime statement. Our accounting practices are just trying to get to grips with the circular economy, and they're just at the very start of it in reality. There's lots of blockages there, but just because this is how we do things doesn't mean to say that's how they have to be. I've been looking at product as a service business models, and I've been told the biggest blockages, several times I've been told, is, well, that's our capital expenditure and that's our operational expenditure. But if there's a will to try and tackle climate change, we have to go back and look at that and redesign that stuff. The most innovative stuff I've seen has come out of waste budgets, because you tend to get a very inspired environmental person that says, I want to do this way. And actually doing the right thing, managing your assets out correctly, looking at reusing and extending their life cycle will save thousands and thousands on the waste budget. And I work with Barts, the largest NHS trust in the country, repairing their hospital beds and their hospital maternity chairs, all of that public seating stuff, all come without the waste budget. Can't get procurement to talk to me, but they save hundreds of thousands of pounds and thousands of tonnes of carbon because they do it in a different way. And as for fear, well, I think we've all got a bit of responsibility for this. I know that we can often feel exposed at work. Trying to push boundaries and do things differently is a risk. And really unfortunately, we've got a terrible habit of looking for the bad and pointing it out, which isn't really helpful at all. I've worked with some really large organisations doing some fantastic stuff, and I said, why don't I know about this? And they say, well, if we talk about this good stuff we're doing, everybody's going to say, well, what about this? And what about that? We've got this massive ship to steer and to change the direction of. But if we don't share what we're doing well and share what's worked, and actually more importantly, share what doesn't work, then we're all going to operate in silos, and those targets that we're all trying to achieve, you know, they're going to be harder to reach. I would love it to be, you know, the case that we could just be much more open about this. Some of the stuff obviously UK GPC are doing are really helpful with that. I work with the Circular Economy Task Force of BITC. What they're doing has got competitors sat around the table saying this is what, you know, this is what we're doing. So a little bit more openness, a little bit more sharing, a little less judging will certainly make this journey a lot easier. I don't really consider myself a massive environmentalist. I really just think I'm a pragmatist. This stuff just makes sense to me. There's nothing more personally annoying to me than designed or systematic obsolescence. It's something I think we all need to challenge. I read in the papers the other week about Sonos stopped supporting a speaker that they were selling 2 years ago. We have to find that unacceptable, and we have to challenge that type of behaviour with the goods and services that we have. I'm currently in a personal battle with an electric toothbrush manufacturer because although they can design lots of super different heads that do all sorts of things, they really just can't find a way to make a battery in an electric toothbrush resealable, to make that reusable. I'll carry on asking like a toddler, but why, but why, but why? And we all just need to try and ask difficult questions and then respect the fact that it's not easy for manufacturers to do it immediately. So don't criticise, but do challenge. This stuff is difficult, but it's not a reinvention of the wheel. And I mean, the building piece that's been talked about already, I'm talking about the stuff inside a building, the goods and services. They're responsible for, I think, Ellen MacArthur Foundation says about 45% of the emissions. But these are the items that we use and dispose of far too quickly. And I was walking into the Renew IT facility where we do the IT refurbishment, and I really love it when I see these pots and they're labelled memory board or RAMs or wires, and there's a whole lot of these bits that have been taken out of broken stuff, ready to put into new ones. And it reminds me of my father's garage and how I used to walk in there and it would have pots saying washers and screws and other bits. And it was 30 odd years, 40 odd years ago, but you know, this is the kind of behaviours that was often used in society. My dad wasn't an engineer actually, he was a policeman, but in his spare time he would reuse. I don't think my mum was that keen when our coffee table was made of the 1970s bathroom tiles that had been left over from the toilet. That's lasted for a long time. My pram was converted into a go-kart. I was pleased with that. My favourite of his conversions was there were these old 1960s, 70s hairdryers, which were a big bag that went on your head and a pipe that came out the back, and that would dry your hair. And when my mum wanted to move on to something slightly more modern, my dad converted that into a vacuum cleaner for his wood shavings in the garage. And actually, when I was thinking of that story and thinking of reuse, I was looking for an image because I knew that hopefully many people in the room would be far too young to know what that looked like, because their innovation is going to come from the modern designers. And when I was looking for a picture of that bag, I came across a news article from 2007. And there was a woman, and this made quite a few national papers, they must have been really boring news, but the story is a woman who had a hairdryer that was still blowing after 40 years. And her gran had bought it for £3, and for some reason it made the national papers. And I was intrigued and a little bit sad, so I tracked her down through Facebook. She also thought I was a little bit sad, but she was quite delighted to discuss. And I can confirm that as of 2 weeks ago, that hairdryer is still blowing and still working at 53 years old. And the lady confirmed that she had now moved on to newer technology and had been through 2 hairdryers in the last 6 years. So the reason I've chosen this is to show that it is scary, but it's not necessarily a reinvention of the wheels, that we do know how to do this stuff. There's a big cost change that we need to make, And all of our hands are on that wheel, and how much you take of that is up to you. There's my details. You can always connect. I try and share stuff through LinkedIn when I see really, really good practices. I'm always happy for anyone to ask questions to me. That's one of my early swaps that I made years ago. I really like it. I don't know if you're familiar with that brand, but every time you go to the toilet, you can feel a lot better about giving something back.
You mentioned Tetra Pak.
Yeah.
What were the really, really practical solutions that they really celebrated and embraced when you were talking to them? What were they struggling with all of their packaging and manufacturing and plants and things like that?
Logistics. It was at a time where there'd been a massive exposure of that as a product from a non-environmental perspective, and they had to do something quickly because I think it was people were looking at the packaging regulations and also looking at packaging for recycling. So they wanted to do the right thing, but it's a complex product, and actually collecting it is very difficult. So we were looking at, do you do it at stores, do you do it at household waste recycling sites? So it was, the biggest challenge was logistics, and then the economics of it, and actually the fact that it had to go back to somewhere in the Netherlands to be recycled. But from a consumer perspective, they were ahead of their game in trying to address this and speak to the consumer. But it was very much a trial and error scheme. But yeah, that's it for their point of view. Is so important for the future of their product to try and do that.
Wouldn't it be great if, a bit like Miss Presto, not mentioning any brands whatsoever, I've only just started getting myself organised to take all of my little pots back to Miss Presto. Wouldn't it be great with people like Connor Metal Box, another big plant, Tetra Pak, them to have distribution centres around the country that we can actually drop these in personally and actually feel reassured that they're actually getting back to source and having something done to them that fits within the policy of the business.
There's so many challenges around this. Design, hopefully, the innovation around eco-design of products and the development of services will hopefully help eradicate some of the problems that we have now. I come into London with my reusable bags, my mug just in case, my water bottle. I can't bring my laptop, there's no other room. Trying to do the right thing is really quite tricky at times. And turning individual things back to individual places, that's not going to be the solution. That can't be the solution, because we're humans, we want new stuff, that's fine. You know, we want life to be easy, that's okay. There's no point trying to change those two things. But there's kind of this interim stage where we don't quite know what to do with things or where to take them. And it's not, I don't think we've quite worked out how we need to make that happen in society yet. But trying to work it out is interesting.
It's often the case that the infrastructure is not there. And often my client will say, we want to do recycling.
Yeah.
And we want to divide up and have multiple bins in multiple places. But then it all gets condensed down at the bottom where the waste collection is. And the local authority or whatever whoever's responsible is not for the facility.
I left the waste industry 10 years ago because I found it so unprogressive. And I was trying to introduce more and more reuse, and it's like our economics about taking away skips and bins full of air and stuff, and you know, it's not progressed at the rate it should, but it has relabelled itself several times to be circular economy and this, that and the other, when in reality doing the same stuff. But the truth is about waste infrastructure, it's different absolutely everywhere you go. And there's been this sort of talk, which I hate, just constant talk about unification of standards. The problem is, local authority contracts are so long because the infrastructure is so expensive that, you know, what was innovative 10, 15 years ago now looks so out of date, but there's a public expectation to be able to do everything everywhere, and it's a real mess, which is why I went into reuse, because it's easier.
With a question about.
Yeah, just thinking about like siloed information that you mentioned there. Is there an opportunity to collectively, I don't know, a Slack group or something like that, where you could put on, it's just knowing about these social enterprises and materials and things like that?
I think, you know, I've started my own, people always say to me, oh, what about this and what about that, and I can see something. I now scribble it all down, and I'm making my own collection of this information, and I'll very happily share that. It's not quite ready yet. A really good, I'm not just saying this because I was in it, but a really good starting point is to look at the Business in the Community Circular Office Guide. That's free to download on their website. It's got lots of really good practical suggestions, some of which I've mentioned today. Another place to look is PwC's Journey into Circularity. They've name dropped literally a whole plethora of really good practices and products that they've introduced. But yeah, as and when I've built a proper library, I'm going to share it because it's no good in my, on a spreadsheet on my laptop. But connecting at some stage when I'm ready, then I'll put that out there.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah.
If you're part of an organisation that's quite old school, what would you say is the best way of tackling that and trying to make this kind of thinking change?
Well, you need to understand the motivations of the person in the room that's causing you the biggest difficulties. And in my experience, when you go really old school, it's profits and a sense of sustainability that will cost you more money, which is crazy. So if you can look at the business cases where the costs, so let's say, for example, the refurbishment of the furniture we do, we sell it out. If I'm sat opposite someone, I'll say this will cost you 70% less. If I'm talking to the environmental person, I'll say this will save you so many tons of CO2. And if I talk to a social enterprise person, I'll say everyone that does this is on the living wage. And so, and the skills creation. So you need to just understand the motivations of the people in the room and transpose it to what's going to motivate them. Ask them to speak to their children or grandchildren, depending on what it is as well, because that's a massive motivator for people as well.
That's fantastic. We're just about time for lunch, so I can thank Anne in the usual way.